welcome back. We're looking forward to continue. Igeres HaKodesh Tes, the 9th Epistle of the Alter Rebbe, 9th letter of the Alter Rebbe. The letter itself begins on page 226 in the original text. We are holding the opposite page pretty much in the center of the page. It's 2 lines before the end of the line. Literally translated, one's wife and children take precedent to all based on the rulings of Torah. Now, what are we talking about? So really, it's a click away. Or you watch it in the past. If you're a newcomer, you can, wherever you're watching it, but there is an advantage on the original website, tanyaonline.com. One word, tanyaonline.com. You have the previous class and previous classes. We merited to learn the first 3 segments in its the complete first 3 segments. Igeres HaKodesh is distinct. We mentioned a few times in the past, and we mentioned periodically again and again for the newcomers, or namely, of course, for the newcomers, the Igeres HaKodesh, just the way you translate. It's holy letters. Holy letters, of course, coming from a holy person, which was the Alter Rebbe, but there is no direct sequence and connection between one letter and another. Like any letter, it was written to a particular community at a particular time, demanding a particular idea. So the Alter Rebbe felt it was important to arouse, they bring its attention and encourage the people to follow. Eventually, of course, it becomes a timeless message because it becomes part of the Sefer Tanya Kadisha. We did mention Tanya has 5 segments. We noted in the past the precision of the 5, Tanya being the Teresh Biksav of Teres Achsidus. Not to go into it now, but the Igeres HaKodesh different and distinct than the first 3 segments, that there is the connection. In other words, there's a presentation, it's a lengthier presentation. Of course, there's certain, you can group certain chapters pointing out certain distinct messages of the Alter Rebbe's works in Likutei Amorim. But at the end of the day, it's all sequential. There's all a connection between one chapter and the other. And if actually the more you learn Tanya, you see the connection between every single chapter and the other, all 53 chapters. Of course, it's lengthier. When you say Tanya, it's predominantly Likutei Amorim, even though eventually you have all the 5 halakim, the 5 segments in Tanya, and Alter Rebbe himself many times cross-references from one to the other. It all becomes part of Tanya Kadisha, but Likutei Amorim also in its length, it's 53 chapters. The one has 12. Igeres HaTeshuvah 12. Igeres HaKodesh, there's 32 epistles. Nonetheless, it's different. It's distinct because it's as you hear it, Igeres HaKodesh. It's letters written, separate letters written to communities based on the subject that Alter Rebbe wanted to touch upon. Even though we did mention also quite a few times that there's a direct thread. You can find an overall, if you learn Igeres HaKodesh, you definitely can glean. The Alter Rebbe is underscoring and emphasizing the mitzvah of Tzedakah by far, even though there's certain Igeres which Alter Rebbe doesn't even mention the word Tzedakah at all. But in the overall, of course, this is, you don't have to learn it that many times to see. You go through Igeres HaKodesh, you see, first of all, the Alter Rebbe explaining, is in his own inimitable, unique style, the mitzvah of Tzedakah, like no one else. Understandably through the lens of Teres Achsidus, which the Alter Rebbe represented, and began with the study. He was the first Chabad Rebbe, the founder of Chassidus Chabad, the philosophy of Chassidus Chabad. So everything he wrote, it was Igeres, explained everything through the lens of Teres Achsidus, understandably so, and you see it in Igeres HaKodesh. But in the overall, between all the Igeres, you could definitely say, yes, the Alter Rebbe does underscore the mitzvah of Tzedakah, charity, that is, and more so, we mentioned in the past also, the Alter Rebbe was appealing or underscores the mitzvah, the tzedakah in its association with Eretz HaKodesh, our holy land, was the backdrop. The Alter Rebbe was appealing for the famous aliyah of Reb Mendel Horodoker and his students and his talmidim and his followers, which lived in great poverty, and the Alter Rebbe campaigned fearlessly for them in order to make their life a bit easier. And so you could definitely say this is something which comes across most of the letters. The idea of tzedakah. But like I said, you can nonetheless take note. There's certain getters, the word tzedakah doesn't come out. It doesn't come up at all. However, the distinction between the getters HaKadosh, the fact that there's no direct connection between one getters to the other. It's one letter, another letter, another letter, as opposed to the first three segments of Tanya. There is the connection of one chapter to the other. If it's Shaykh V'Emunah, Igeres HaTshuva, and so on. We did point out that you find Alter Rebbe himself cross-referencing even within Igeres HaKadosh to one to the other, like I explained in that letter that I sent to this in this time, last year or so. Together with that, it is separate. Every letter is separate than the other. This letter, the Alter Rebbe also underscores the mitzvah of tzedakah. He comes across very poignantly in the way a yid engages in the workforce, why he goes to work, even though it's a mandate of Torah. Hashem wants us not to sit in the base of Medrash and believe the money is going to come through the window. Hashem wants us to make a keli, al piteva, a container, a vessel, a natural vessel, where the bracha parnasa should connect with, and to, you have the tasa, which becomes the container for the beiracha, for the bracha. But why are you going to work? Your whole approach of the reason to this extending yourself on a daily basis, as we mentioned, in the end of the day, become, and probably does, becomes the significant majority of the person's life, his investment in work. The significant majority of a person's lifetime, at least the better part of his years, every day. A person goes to work every morning, comes back at night. Understandably, there are differences between, not everybody has the same work hours, not everybody has the same work investment. Jobs are different, but in the overall, people go out to work in order to make a living, says the Alter Rebbe. That itself, we have to understand that the Yid, the way the Alter Rebbe underscores this idea that the Yid, when he goes out to the workplace, it's distinct than any other human being going out to the workplace, even though on the surface it seems to be similar. It's not meant to be that distinct on the surface, that is. Understandably, he is extra careful based on the rules of Torah, in honesty, integrity in his business, chas v'shalom, not to do anything which interferes with being an honest Yid, the way it's called. In Yiddish would be the Yid. It's a Torah demand, it's a Torah mandate. But together with that, even as an Yid, a person can go out to the workplace not the way the Eibishter wants him, without the focus. What is demanded from him is from a Yid. This is the message that Alter Rebbe began with. And you can see it again in the previous class. We elaborated on that. We shouldn't take much of the present class elaborating on the previous, because it's really a click away. Alter Rebbe brings this pasuk, in brief that is, Alter Rebbe means, what is so unique about the Yid? There are one nation, ba'aretz, in the land. Which means when you want to see the difference of a Yid and a non-Yid, it's beyond demonstrative on every single step of the Yid's life. A Yid gets up in the morning, doesn't go straight to the workplace. He goes to shul, he learns Torah, learns about Chassidus, about Musar. He goes to daven. Only basically the Gemara says, he learns Torah, and then he goes to the work. The Yid sits down to eat. He washes, if it's for a piece of bread, he makes a bracha, be the blessing before, the blessing after. Yid was wearing a talis cotton, and talis godly, wears tefillin. Every step of the Yid, you see Mika Amcha Yisrael, the uniqueness of the Yid. Comes to Alter Rebbe and says, and points out, look at the end of the pasuk. It says ba'aretz, not only in spiritual matters, which is shamayim matters, right? The Yid's life is compartmentalized between shamayim and aretz. There's his spiritual, or his conduct, which is on a spiritual plane. Even this which he does physically, eating matzah is a physical act, sitting in a sukkah is a physical act, putting on tefillin is a physical act, but nonetheless, it's the shamayim, it's the heavenly dimension. It is associated with the ruchnius, it's kuli ruchnius. The average person doesn't put boxes on his hand. And certainly not every day. It's the tzad ruchni, it's that mandate the Yid has to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu with the mitzvahs that he does on a daily basis and beyond the daily basis, in Shachris and Mincha Ma'ariv. But that's not the Oretz dimension within the Yid. The Oretz dimension of the Yid is the regular stuff the Yid does. Comes the Pasuk and says, even there you see the difference and the distinction between one Yid, the Yid and the non-Yid. Goy echad ba'aretz, even in artistic manners, even in worldly matters, in mundane interactions, also there you see the difference and the very distinct difference between a Yid and a non-Yid. And the Alter Rebbe says, a non-Yid goes, what is he focusing? Bring more money and accumulate more money and to sustain one's family and one's wife and children out of great love. Not a big sin. To the contrary, it's good. The person puts himself in a structure. It's a very healthy thing psychologically, emotionally, and it does only good when a person goes out to work. Yetzi Odom Lavedose. Every single day, it's one of the most healthiest things a human being can do. But nonetheless, Goy Echad Ba'oretz, a Yid doesn't go out just to the workplace to accumulate money and to sustain himself, his family, and when you're focused only on that, and understandably, the more you make, the more you have, the more you accumulate, the more you assemble, and the more you indulge and extend to your dear ones, your wife, your children, that they should have more, and they should be able to benefit from the delicacies of Ilam Hazim more and more, because that's your approach, to make it, to have greater success, to be able to accumulate more money for yourself, for your loved ones. So the more you have, the more your focus is on extending it to them, that they should be are able to expand their comforts within Elam Hazeh. The Yid's approach is distinct. Gai echad ba'aretz. And when I go out to the workforce, to the workplace, I have one thing in mind. It's not a particular day. It's my overall focus, my overall objective, my overall goal. Because I have a neshama. And neshama is a chelik of a kamimal. It's a part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It doesn't need to eat, sleep, doesn't need a roof over the head. It is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And for that matter, after 120, it goes back, ruach l'ruach halikim asher nesona, goes back to its source. It truly, taka, doesn't engage in all the stuff the person engages with in Elam Hazeh. It's a free bird, goes soars on high. It goes back and it connects and knots itself. It's part of the knot of its source, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, which it's always a chelik of Gamimal. It doesn't need all that. But because the neshama comes down into an animal soul, and in other words, into Elam Hazeh, invests in the Nefesh Bahamis. It's saying this in brief. What does it mean, invested in Nefesh Bahamis? In other words, the Nefesh Likis, Alter Rebbe writes many times, Allocating that it's the Nefesh Likis is invested in the Nefesh Bahamis. Not, again, it's an idea itself which it's worthwhile on its own, and we did speak about it in the past, what its ramifications, if it stays separate, someone says, I indulge in Elam Hazeh, maybe even cross the stop sign between the permissible and the permitted. That's with my Nefesh Bahamis, with my Nefesh Likis. It's only learning Torah and doing mitzvahs and everything. Shalom al Yisrael. I live a very peaceful life. This I do with this soul, and the bad stuff I do with this soul, the good stuff I do with that soul. No, the Nefesh Likis is invested in the Nefesh Bahamis. From the moment it comes down into the world, Chas v'Shalom, a person does something inappropriate, he's pulling the Nefesh Likis. He's dragging it along into that experience, Rahman al-Islam, ultimately taking part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and bringing into the lowliness, especially we learn Tanya, Shalosh Klipzat Meis, the 3 levels of impurity, the nadir impurity, vis-a-vis Klipas Neg. But again, as Alter Rebbe explains in the very beginning of Koti Amor, this idea, for that matter, of the Nefesh Likis pulled into every experience of the Nefesh Bahamis. You can see it in the end of the 24th chapter of Likutei Amorim, the first segment. It's a click away on this site. We have all the classes lined up from the very beginning of Likutei Amorim of Tanya. So the Nefesh Likis, in the end of the day, is in Elam Hazeh. It's invested in an animal soul, and it's in a body, and in order, the Nefesh Likis to be able to do its shlichus, to implement, to execute its shlichus, its mandate, alei adamis, in this world. At the end of the day, it needs to eat and sleep. It needs a roof over its head, because the body, which is ultimately part of the execution, an important part of the execution of the Ratzon Hashem of the Yid's mandate. Take, for example, putting on tefillin. The Yid's body, the tefillin is placed on the Yid's body. The Nefesh Likis doesn't have a physical hand, but now that it attains a new level, so to say, of connection to Olam Hazeh through investing in the animal soul, which is the chayis of the person. It's called nefesh hachayunis, which gives life to the human being as a human being, and invest in that. And that nefesh hachayunis gives life to a physical body. So in order for nefesh lekis to put on tefillin every day, it has to eat. If not, the body would expire. So the nefesh lekis, it has to be fed, and it needs a roof over its head, and needs to live a regular life. And then the person has a family, that wife and children. Yeah, they also have the same mandate as me. So when a Yid goes out to the workforce, he has one thing in mind. I need to make sure that I am healthy, and I have what I need. My family has what they need. Why? In order to be able to implement my mandate as a Yid to bring ilakus, to bring godliness through learning Torah, doing mitzvahs, ultimately mentioned the overall mandate of the Yid, to establish this world, an abode, to make this world an abode for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a home for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's my mandate, and that's why I go out to work. And that's the only reason why I go out to work. To allow the godly soul to be able to live and continue living in this world as a healthy soul, and with a healthy body. In other words, that the nefesh lekis, which is always a healthy nefesh lekis, namely when it aligns itself with the Ratzon Hashem, but the fact that it's invested in a body, invested in a body, and that needs all the stuff a body and the nefesh chayunis needs in order to live. That's why I'm going to the workplace, in order to have some bread on my table, or maybe a lot of bread on my table, and abundance. Alter Rebbe is not saying anything less than that a Yid has to have less. But because my focus, and I need this, and I need a normal house, and so on and so forth, in order to do what I have to do, in order to be able to live my life as a Yid, to be able to implement my shlichus, my mandate in this world, of establishing this world, to become a dir Aleis Baruch, a doma soul for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Of course, to learning my Torah and doing my mitzvahs. And the Alter Rebbe says, if that's your focus, so what if you have extra money? Are you just allowed, and you're able to, because you're here to live, and you're able to live, and you're able to live even comfortably. But for that, for whatever reason, those few weeks was distinctly successful, as an example. Different than any other. I made a lot of money those few weeks. Because my going out to the workplace in order to make money is in order that I should be able to implement my mandate as a from a Yid. So when I have a lot of money and I realize, I could still live, and I could learn Torah, and I could do mitzvahs, and I'd be able to soothe my hunger in order to learn Torah, right? A person's very hungry, it's hard for him to concentrate on his learning Torah, so but I had a good sandwich this morning, I was able to afford that sandwich. And I had a normal bed, and I went to sleep normal, so my body's rested. And I have a roof over my head, and I have a decent and a normal home, and everything what it takes that a person should live, particularly the generation, the way things are set up, if it's a car, whatever it is, I have everything I need. So that those few weeks or those few years, I made an enormous amount of extra money, or was enormously successful, and I accumulated a lot of money. What am I doing with that money? If my whole mandate, my whole reason why I go out to the workplace is just to make sure that I'm able to stay alive and do what I have to do in context of my mandate of learning Torah and doing Hashem's mitzvahs. And that's the reason why on the onset I connect myself with the workplace. If I made a lot of money that week or that month or those few years or that year as an example, what am I doing with the money? Following this what Hashem wants, because on the onset I did not accumulate this money for myself or for my loved ones, which would say the more I have, the more I will indulge in the delicacies and delights of Elam Haz and make sure they do the same, because I love them so much, which is only natural and normal. But because my mandate, because my objective rather and goal and focus is going out there in order to sustain, to establish the connection between my godly soul and my body, and to live a healthy life in order that I should be able to execute my mandate, why Hashem sent me to this world. So if I have a lot of money, I'm going to continue in that pattern. I have what I need. I'm not hungry. If there's more money, and there's so many people in need, and there's the mitzvah of tzedakah, and mitzvah of tzedakah is the greatest mitzvah of all mitzvahs. So of course I'm going to take that money and extend it to the poor, because the whole reason why I accumulated money is because I wanted to be able to serve Hashem directly or indirectly. In this case, you can say it's indirectly. It's not you're putting on tefillin, you're not going to a shir and Torah, but when you go to your workplace, but indirectly, it's ultimately about avodas Hashem. I'm here to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Hashem wants me to live. Therefore, Hashem says, in order your godly soul and your wife's godly soul and your children's godly soul should be able to implement, should be able to actualize their mandate. That's why I go to the workplace. So when I have a lot of money, I continue serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu and giving tzedakah, and especially I know tzedakah is the greatest mitzvah of all mitzvahs. The Alter Rebbe has, we mentioned last week, famous Perek in Perek Lamed Zayin in Tanya, other places as well, especially in Igeres HaKodesh, but primarily in Perek Lamed Zayin Allocating, you see a beautiful explanation of the Alter Rebbe, why tzedakah is the most important mitzvah. That's why tzedakah, every mitzvah brings redemption. So why is it said precisely about the mitzvah tzedakah? Because tzedakah is a mitzvah which hastens the geula based on what stands behind, or the center, front and center of that mitzvah. You can see it there, the beautiful explanation of the Alter Rebbe. So because I know mitzvah tzedakah is such an important mitzvah, so I have more money, of course I'm giving it to tzedakah. Because the whole reason why I went out to work is in order to be able to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu with joy and gladness of heart and ease and so on. That's pretty much the message up till now. So Alter Rebbe says, in this case, Alter Rebbe says, in essence, this is the conclusion of that statement, what he said before. I'm here to vitalize, meaning to say, to establish that my godly soul should be able to healthily live in Elam Hazeh, or to connect to a nefesh chayunis and a body, that they should be able to healthily live in Elam Hazeh, that my nefesh lakis should be able to do its service, to be able to execute its service to its creator, and my wife, and my children, which have the same mandate ultimately as me. So the question is, if that's your focus, so why are you only giving it to your wife and children? There's so many, let's say there's 10 families in your community, as an example. If there's more or less, we can be using just as an example. And I put in so many certain hours a day into my work in order to accumulate a certain amount of money. And let's say I accumulate, for 10 people, I have a family, let's say, someone has a family of ultimately 10 people, him and his wife and his children. He has 8 children, let's say. There's another family with also 10. And because I'm doing it in order to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in order to establish 10 healthy bodies, if you will, that they should be able to implement and actualize their mandate in establishing for HaKadosh Baruch Hu a dira b'tachteinim, a dwelling place in this world from their learning Torah and doing mitzvahs, which their mandate is similar to mine, and that's why I'm going out there. And in my paycheck that I pick up every 2 weeks, or this which I accumulate from my business, from my work, I pay myself, in any way that the person is paid for his work, or if he is leading himself a business or taking a check from an employee by another, as an example. And that's what I accumulate in every month. This is a certain amount of money. I'm able to sustain myself and these other 9 parties. And that's my focus, that's my goal. And that's solely my focus and my goal. I have nothing other than that. I would sit and learn Torah the whole day. So question is really, conceptually at least, asking, why are you giving it to this group? Why don't you give it to the other group, which would mean the other family? If you're doing it for yourself, so naturally you're going out me'ava, because you love these people, and it's only normal. A person has a connection to a spouse, children, which are yotzi chalotzav, it's a blood relative. It's only natural and it's inherent that a person loves their children. Person is deeply connected to a spouse. That's normal. And if you're going out to the workplace, because of that. So of course, you're giving it to the ones who you love. The other ones, you don't dislike them or not love them, but nonetheless, you can't compare to the inheritance. They love you for your families. Of course, you give it to the family. Let them go work and and let then extend to their own family and the other eight family as an example. But if you're going out to the workplace only to sustain a nefesh elikis, to make sure the nefesh elikis is living in a healthy body in order to be able to do what it's meant to do, and so too you're not only bringing in a certain amount of money to sustain yourself, but also to the other 9 parties in your family, your wife and the other 8 children, as an example. And that's your only purpose of why you give it to them. Why not to the other family? They're also here to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and if they will have enough money, they will be able to learn Torah and do mitzvahs, and ultimately do their share in implementing the mandate of every single Yid in establishing this world, a home for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So why are you giving it to them? So what am I giving to them? They're my family. But if you're saying that the only purpose of working and accumulating money is not because you just love your family, it's in order to sustain a godly soul. So that's a godly soul. This is a godly soul. Why are you giving it to them and not to the other family? So the Rebbe says, according to Torah, because the Eibishter Torah establishes that primarily you have to support your wife and your own children. Okay, that's a Torah mandate. Therefore, I'm giving it to them. I still don't lose focus. I'm giving it to them in order that their godly soul, lahachis, the lashon is nefashis, chel kilukus v'matz machaserei mechesed chinam. In order that their nefesh elikis should be able to live healthily, which is through a healthy body, healthy nefesh chayonis. In order they should serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why am I giving it to them? Not to them, not to them rather, and not to the other? Because that's what the Eibishter says. According to Torah, you have to provide for your wife and children. So it's all based on a Torah mandate. Okay, so it's based on a Torah mandate. But as we mentioned, what if you have excess amount of money? At that point, if it's for the sake of Torah, there's someone in need, of course you're going to extend that money to the other party, because you have what you need. Your chelik elokah has a comfort living, his body is living comfortably. And so to your entire family, your wife and your children are living very comfortably. When you have a certain excess amount of money, you're giving it to tzedakah, because the whole reason why you accumulated money is to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Alter Rebbe says over here, before he says that, he goes, he says, he adds over here, which has to be explained, has to be understood. We're not going to go into it now. Each one could look it up and see what does that exactly mean. Tzedakah says it's the exclusion of tzaddikim shebedeir, the tzaddikim in the generation. A person has to provide for the tzaddikim generation even before his own children. And tzaddikim sheberetz Yisrael, the tzaddikim sheberetz Yisrael, again, Tzedakah is undoubtedly referring to Mendel Havidoker, which lived in Eretz Yisrael then. The tzaddikim in Eretz Yisrael, but he's giving a rule. Tzaddikim Yisrael, tzaddikim shebechutz la'aretz. They come before the tzaddikim out of Eretz Yisrael, which they themselves, tzaddikim shebechutz la'aretz, take precedent over one's own family in order of providing. So it's not that person cuts off his family from his gains, but the order, first you provide for the tzaddikim and then for your family. Tzaddikim in Eretz Yisrael take precedent that tzaddikim mechutz la'aretz levad mizeh shelo nichol kameis mechutz la'aretz v'dal. To the exclusion, if the tzaddikim mechutz la'aretz are greater than tzaddikim in Eretz Yisrael, then the order is tzaddikim mechutz la'aretz, tzaddikim in Eretz Yisrael, and then your own family. But what is the Alter Rebbe's basically message over here? When you do have that excess amount of money, what are you doing with it? Because the whole purpose of your working, you're assembling this amount, this accumulating this amount of money, in order to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's your sole focus. You're talking about a focus with an honest focus, a focus with maximum integrity. The focus, the goal, when you go out every day and say, I'd rather learn Torah, but I have to make sure that I'm going to be able to live as a healthy human being in order to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and so too the people I'm responsible for according to Torah. And that is what is triggering you every day to go out to the workplace and spending so many hours, because you have this divine, godly objective and goal. So when there's a need and there's a calling for tzedakah, you're to be the first one there. And as Alter Rebbe goes on, and therefore, my beloved, my brothers, pay attention. Pay your heart's attention to these words which I'm telling, which I'm telling over here with maximum brevity. And he says in bracket, I will face to face talk to you with much greater length and elaboration. But here I'm saying this in brief. How the main service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in these times, in the epoch of these times, be'ikvus Mashiach, in the end of times, which is called and known as the heels of Mashiach, which is in brief, Am Yisrael is one organism, even in every single generation. There's the head of the generation, and then there's the other limb of the generation. Most of the people are not particularly on a high level within the organism of the body, especially in the average generation. Even though there's always the head, there's always the reish of every single dair, which is the Tzedakah dair, the Nasiha dair, and so on. But when you look at all generations combined, the earlier generations were the head. Can you compare Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, the Shvatim, the Tzaddikim, and of course even later Moshe and the Deir Midbar, which it says they were involved completely into Torah. And then you have Yeshua and his generation, and not every generation was alike, but in the overall, when the time of the Beis Hamikdash was stood, the average person was able to see HaKadosh Baruch Hu, be seen by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They were very sensitive to the divine. The Beis Hamikdash was built in their generation, the Beis Sheni, and before that, at that time, the Tanoim, which many of them were part of the Beis Sheni, but the Tanoim, and the Amiroim, and the Rabbanan Svuroi, and the Ga'anim, and then Rishonim and Achreinim, these were more like the upper echelon of the organism of Am Yisrael. When you point out you look at it like the very beginning of time till the end of time. Now, especially after Yeridus Hadeiros, just to parenthetically note, if it's Yeridus Hadeiros, if there is a descent, so to say, in level, how are we going to usher in all the good stuff which is supposed to come in the end of time? For that matter, we're called Ikvis Mashiach. And the answer is, of course, because it's all cumulative. It is what they began, we continue. It's like a midget on a giant's shoulder. The giant doesn't go away. The gigantic Avedus Hashem, if you will, which was the norm in the time of the Tanaim and Amiraim and so on, this remains, and it's all a build-up, and therefore every action, thought, speech, and action anybody does in any generation, he's bringing the Geula even closer, because it's all an extension, it's all accumulative, nothing of good ever goes away. Understandably so. Kedusha lo yizozah min koima, as the expression. Kedusha doesn't budge from its place. Negative stuff you can get rid of, and you're meant to get rid of. That's the point of tshuva, to remove all negative energy, and what remains would always be the good, the holy, the sacred, the divine. And it is accumulative. So when you have every generation on top of the previous generation, in the end of the day, it's a descend, Yeridas Hadeiros. So the generation before Mashiach's coming is called Ikvis Mashiach. This is the soul. Soul is this bottom of the foot. The heel, the end, because it's associated with the end times. This is the generation which is going to bring Mashiach. Now there is something, not to go into it now, but very briefly, there's something special about actually the heel. For that matter, when a person wants to move on, especially once a person has to do something audacious, they would put their foot in, because the foot is less, for that matter, the heel is called the malchamavis of the person's body, because it's usually harder, less sensitive, as opposed to somebody, even their hands, their fingers, and of course when you're talking about the vital organs, this is in the end, in the rock bottom. If someone has to put go into cold water, hot water, they put their foot in first, which there's something unique about the fact that this generation, or these generation of Ikvis Mashiach, they soldiered forward from a certain perspective and point of view towards things which they needed to do audaciously, perhaps even more or different than the great Tanoim and Amiraim from a certain perspective and point of view. Of course, there was Bala Mesiris Nefesh, the 10 martyrs, were Tanoim, Rabbi Akiva. He had his own mind, Kol Yomai. He thought about Mesiris Nefesh, the ultimate sacrifice. In other words, the ultimate putting himself away for, to the extent of expiration for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's what happened to him in the end of his life. But the idea that so to say, blindly and doing what you have to do and connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's an advantage of the heel over the more sensitive organs within the person. He's a little more sensitive with them and to them. Even somebody who has to take an intellectual approach or approach to something based on his appreciation, his understanding, and then not always the person comes to that conclusion. Oh, I think I have to do that. Maybe I shouldn't do that, because that's when you have something so great as intellect and feeling and emotions and so on. They fluctuate. Now I feel this way, now I feel the other way. The heel doesn't pay so much attention to all that. You got to go, it moves on. That's where the Baalei Mesiris Nefesh, the Baalei Mesiris Nefesh of this generation, the previous, but all in this epoch, it says Moshe Rabbeinu said, when he said, Moshe Rabbeinu was most humble from all the people on the face of the earth. It said, namely, he had that anova, that humility, that humbleness in the face of the Baalei Mesiris Nefesh, people who self-sacrifice. In the end of all generation, not to think much. They were the heel. No much intelligence there, and for that matter, it's quite hard and aggressive. Move on. And that's the way it was in the last century. People had Mesiris Nefesh for HaKadosh Baruch Hu in different ways. So there's an advantage when you say Ikvis Mashiach, not to go into it now, but in the end, Alter Rebbe says Ikvis in the end of the heels of Mashiach. Now the main service is Avodas Tzedakah. It's the service of Tzedakah, because they're Ikvis Mashiach, and we have to usher in redemption. And redemption comes through Tzedakah. So what is the main objective, and what is the main Avodah, what is the main service of a Yid? Today is Tzedakah. And Alter Rebbe says, I'm saying this with Biktsara Ma'ed, with maximum brevity. I'll be able to have a time to elaborate on this, but I'm telling this to you very briefly. But this is the message, that the name Avodas Hashem is today, the end of time, because we have to usher in Geula, Ein Yisrael Nigolim Ela B'Tzedakah, and we are the Ikvis Mashiach. So this becomes a very centralistic Avodah, or the most important Avodah is giving Tzedakah. What about Talmud Torah? Can I get called Talmud Torah being the greatest mitzvah? And Alter Rebbe says, again, talking about Alter Rebbe, the greatest giants in Limudat Torah, in knowledge, and in appreciation of Torah, delivery of Torah. Alter Rebbe, one of the greatest giants of all of history. Famous expression of the Rogatchover, which was also a unique figure known to be the Sar HaTorah, the true minister of Torah in his generation, and for many generations thereafter. What he said about the Alter Rebbe and the Rambam, a famous expression of his, Alter Rebbe was gigantic in Torah. Alter Rebbe doesn't have to, so to say, point this out just conceptually. What about Torah? No, the Alter Rebbe was that Ish HaTorah, but the Alter Rebbe is speaking about this mitzvah of Talmud Torah. And for that matter, the Alter Rebbe, who, like the Alter Rebbe pointed out, we talk about this perfect manual in Avodas Hashem. We spoke about this many times, about the Sefer Tanya, the 5th chapter of Allocating, the 23rd, 37th. Alter Rebbe tells us what happens when a Yid learns Torah. And how many times Alter Rebbe writes this very statement, Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, in Allocating itself, Ein Sfeir. Myriads of times. And Alter Rebbe lived Torah. He was one of the great, most gigantic figures in Torah of all times. And here the Alter Rebbe goes back to the Maimon Azal. He says, what about that Talmud Torah Shokol Keneged Gemilas Chasadim? That the Talmud Torah weighs greater than Gemilas Chasadim, which we say, including the mitzvah Tzedakah, extending kindness, that literally means Gemilas Chasadim. And the Azal tells us to us. So he says, the Azal was telling us that it would be mayhem in their times. Well, Talmud Torah, that's from Talmud Torah, learning Torah was their main service. As we know, we spoke about in the end of the 7th Igeres, just now we're holding the 9th, relatively recent, a click away towards the end of the 7th Igeres. the seventh letter, the seventh presentation in this segment of Igeres HaKodesh, the seventh epistle. The Alter Rebbe writes clearly that in every generation they have their particular mandate, not overlooking the stuff or the avodah of every yid, which is common in every single generation. The Tanaim used to put on tefillin every day, and they used to have a mezuzah, and they used to have tzitzis and so on. That we do in every single generation, but nonetheless, every generation on its own has their particular mandate, their particular shlichus, which they are meant to do, and that becomes the center of their, and the shar, like the Alter Rebbe writes in a number of other places. Our Rebbe points out the notion of a shar becomes the gateway. Means you have everything, you got to go through the gate in order to come to this where you want to reach. The gateway to HaKadosh Baruch Hu goes through and is channeled through the particular mandate, the call upon, the calling of that generation. And again, who establishes what's the shlichus of a generation? Is again a tzaddik, a Moshe Rabbeinu. Not everybody can do that. Like the men we spoke about many times. What is the Tzav Hashah today? It's to bring another yid into the fold. As we heard from our Nasi. This is the Tzav Hashah, the call of the hour today. To bring another yid into the fold of Torah mitzvahs. Does it mean because of that I don't have Mashiach in Torah, I don't have the mezuzah, my door, my tefillin, my mezuzah, my tzitzis, my matzahs, my lulav, my esrog, my sukkah? Of course I do. That's common in every generation. What is the shlichus? What is the main mandate of the generation? Listen to your Nasi, and the Nasi will tell you. And that becomes the Nasi. And everything, this becomes the gateway through which everything passes by. In other words, when you want to get from one area to the other, of course there's many things in that domain where your starting point is, but then there's the gateway through which you want to bring everything up. That gateway is the way you can connect from the inside to the out, in this case between the Yid and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The gateway is his main shlichus, and everything comes along. So today's main shlichus is to bring another Yid into the fold. Hafatzis HaTeira, Hafatzis HaYadus, Hafatzis HaChsidus, Hafatzis HaMayanis Chut, spreading the wellsprings of Teira, and of Chsidus, and of the Baal Shem Tov outwards. That's the mandate of the generation. To machzik another Yid, to bring another Yid into the fold of Teira mitzvahs. What about in the time of the Tanaim? Time of the Tanaim was in order to bring about Teresh Balpeh. Now Teresh Balpeh, the Tanaim didn't bring it about. Teresh Balpeh was given to Moshe Rabbeinu in Har Sinai. It says Tereis. Hashem gave the written Torah and the oral Torah to Moshe Rabbeinu, the entire oral Torah. That's how the generation then knew how to put on tefillin. What does it say about tefillin in the Torah, in the written Torah? Tie it as a sign in your hand, and it'll take tofes between your eyes. What are you exactly supposed to do? We don't know what we're supposed to do. The oral Torah will tell us that we're supposed to put on the tefillin the way the tefillin looks, which is hundreds of details which don't say in the written Torah. But it's gleaned from the written Torah. And the Eibusha told us all to Moshe Rabbeinu. So what did the Tanaim accomplish? They documented everything. They showed you the connection, the correlation between Teresh B'Ksav and Teresh B'Peh, that all these dinim, for example, the tefillin, you find it in the words, in those brief words of Teresh B'Ksav. And if it's chsaftim right on the doorpost, it's not to take a marker on right on the doorpost, Hashem, I love you, or similar, of your homes and your gates. No, it's the mezuzah the way we know it. That's coming from the oral Torah. The oral Torah stems from the written Torah. Everything we have in the oral Torah are extracted from and gleaned from the way that very verse was said and written, documented in our holy Torah. So what did the Tanaim do? They documented the Torah Shebaal Peh. That's what their mandate was. To show you as an example, how do we know that the pasuk you should write on the doorposts of your homes and your gates? How do we know it's the mezuzah that we have it? Which two parshas of Shema, Vayim, Shemaya rolled into the place. Not written on the doorpost itself, but placed on the doorpost. How do we know all that? The Chachamim, they showed us, they documented everything when Moshe Rabbeinu heard of Mount Sinai. And they showed, you see that pasuk? That's the way the Chachamim pulled the energy from that pasuk and showed you that verse has all these messages. So what was their main mandate? What were they involved with day and night? Of course, learning Torah. Because that's what their mandate was, that they put on film, that they have their own mezuzah, they ate matzah. Did they eat matzah on Pesach and sit in the sukkah on sukkahs? Of course they did. That's a common thread. That's a common denominator between every single yid. But nonetheless, every generation, every epoch has their mandate. The mandate of the Tanoim was the documentation of that. So, of course, to them, what was their main mitzvah? To learn Torah. So the Rebbe says, Talmud Torah shokul keneged gemach. The Talmud Torah is similar. The Talmud Torah is similar. Excuse me. The Talmud Torah is similar to Gemilas Chasad, to being overriding rather. Gemilas Chasad and the mitzvah is bimehem, is in their days. Talmud Torah, you could have that. Some Talmud Torah was the main service, and therefore Chacham G'daylim, they were great wise people. Tanoim ve'amiroim, they were the famous, infamous Tanoim, and Amiroim. In the end of time, that the Sukkos David would mean, usually it's referring to the Beis Hamikdash, which was the epicenter of Am Yisrael, the maximum, the climactic Kedusha which existed with Am Yisrael. And that Sukkos David fell to the lowest of levels, and to the level of Raglayim, feet, and to the level of the heels, means the Kedusha fell to the most nadir levels. That's what the final goals is all about. That for sure doesn't need any explanation. That the Kedusha of Elokus, which was there at different times, it fell a little bit, even a lot, but it didn't fall to rock bottom like we know it today, especially today. In the last year, 2 years, 3 years, decade, few decades, rock bottom. So the Sukkos of it fell all the way to the level of Raglayim, Vikvayim, feet and heels, Shubchinis Asiyah, which is action vis-a-vis intellect, which was the time of the Tanai Miraim, the great Chachamim G'daylim, and then the generations from them till now was everything in between. But now it fell all the way to Asiyah. So ain't derech l'davka b'be'emes, there's no way to cleave HaKadosh Baruch Hu truly lahavcha chasher l'neheredu to transform the darkness to its light. Ki'im b'bchinas Asiyah. Also, we go to where the issue, where the problem is. We try to pick up the pieces from where the area from the area for where the pieces fell and plummeted downwards. We go to the area where the issue is, because the Shechina, the holiness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, plummeted to the lowest place. So we go down to that place and we start collecting the pieces. It's like you have a glass, broke into 3 pieces. So you just go to the pieces and you pick it up and you start putting it together. But if it's shattered and pieces scrambled all over, you go all the way to the pieces. And if you have to put that together, which is a bigger deal, of course, you go from the area where the last pieces of glass are and you start your way inwards. And so too, when the Shekhinah fell all the way down to the level of Asiyah, so we start the transformation, the process of transformation of darkness to light all the way in the world of Asiyah, which is about Tzedakah, because Tzedakah is giving. Tzedakah is very much the action, less sensation, more action. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't put in our feelings. We give Tzedakah. For that matter, it's very important. In Halacha, it says how significant, how vital it is, and essential it is, and how crucial it is to show empathy to the poor when we're extending the Tzedakah. Very important to extend. The Gemara says that if you didn't do that, you don't get the real reward for the tzedakah that you gave, even though you were machai and nefshani, you gave him life, you gave him that sandwich, you gave him the ability to live that specific day. But because you did it angrily or without any sympathy, without any empathy, there's a problem to that. And of course, you have to show that. But what's the main objective of tzedakah? That's an addendum tzedakah, very important addendum tzedakah. And chas v'shalom, you could lose your reward for the tzedakah you gave if you did it differently than the way the Torah wants you to give tzedakah, with demonstrating that empathy, that sympathy. However, it's still an addendum to the mitzvah of tzedakah. What's the main idea of tzedakah? The actual giving. Put your hands in your pocket, take out the money, and give it to the poor. Smile, yes, that's the right way to do it. That's the optimal way to do it. But the main thing is you're giving, because with that money you can buy himself a sandwich if he's hungry, if he or she is hungry. And when they eat the sandwich, they become soothed, they feel good. The fact that you did it with a lousy face and you didn't extend that sympathy to the poor, there's an issue. And they feel it. They feel it, and for a long time. Therefore, the Gemara says to that extent that you might lose your reward for that important mitzvah you did, even though you're Mechayin Avshad, you gave him life. You literally extended his life by that day, and hopefully days and years, weeks and months and years and so on. Therefore, it's important to identify with her vulnerability, of course. But what is the main idea of tzedakah? Is action, and therefore the Alter Rebbe says now it's important to give tzedakah more than even the intellectual pursuit of Limudat Torah. Now, Alter Rebbe is really not canceling the whole idea of the importance of a Yid learning every day and every moment a Yid is supposed to utilize in learning Torah. If you're standing in a bank and there's a long line, you should have something in your hand and you should learn Torah, because there is an idea of what Torah is all about. Alter Rebbe himself explains there in these chapters. But in the overall, what is the mandate today is to do for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And there's nothing more in the context of asiyah, of doing for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, than the mitzvah of tzedakah, as explained in that very period, Lamed Zayin in Allocating. And because the Shechina of the Sukkot David fell all the way rock bottom to asiyah, we got to pick up the pieces. We have to go to the asiyah and work our way up from there. And asiyah predominantly would be the mitzvah of tzedakah. Shumaisa tzedakah yadul maskilim, and snow shibchina si belakus, which is the asiyah in elukus. In other words, asiyah in connection to one's connecting to his creator, to godliness, is extending oneself and bringing chayis, means vitality, life, to somebody who has nothing. Generally, it's emulating HaKadosh Baruch Hu as well. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu is asiyah in elukus. By HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Hashem extending himself to not only the superior plane where the malachim are, the neshamis are, and the connection of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Elam Atzilus can't compare, a world which houses the Ein Sof. No, the idea of asiyah by HaKadosh Baruch Hu is to go lower and lower and to provide for the lowest of the low, which is this world, and within this world there are different levels, and they wish to provide again lower and lower. That's of course by HaKadosh Baruch Hu as asiyah, but by us also, how do we extend that asiyah, that action in our connection to Holocaust, is to give, and to give the people who are less than Megameh, who have nothing. That is asiyah, that's action in order to bring in, to usher in Geula, because the Sukkot David fell all the way into asiyah, into regel, into the ikvayim, and therefore the avodah today is to give stuff and to give a lot of it. Alter Rebbe concludes the chapter, and the connection to the beginning of the chapter, that if you're going out to the workplace to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, yes, you have a certain amount of money, extra amount of money, or maybe there's a call then that maybe you cannot live, or you cannot appreciate what you of Elam Hazah, what you did the day before, because there's a certain calling, there's a certain need. Yes, you're going to live, but a little with minimal, or less than the day before, less than the year before, or at least for a little period, because of the call of the need. So you're able to live, you're able to live healthily, you're able to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu with joy and gladness of heart, but you have a certain excess amount of money. Yeah, you're going to give it to tzedakah, and because now, Ein Yisrael Nigolim Ela B'Tzedakah, when the Sukkot David fell all the way to Raglayim and Ikvayim, it's through Asiyah that we usher in Geula. Now, Alter Rebbe concludes this chapter, very, very important statement. Of course, every word of the Alter Rebbe is very important, but it's an intriguing line. Chol, or two lines or so, a few lines of Chol. The one who shechts his Yetzer Hara in this. He slaughters his Yetzer Hara. Why such an expression? And the reason is obvious. Because it comes to giving tzedakah, sometimes we have to compel ourselves. As we know that many Yidden, most of the people, this is the nature of which we spoke about last week. Actually, I believe it was last week we spoke about this idea of by nature people. Money is something you take in, you don't extend outwards. When we know mitzvah tzedakah, but unless you see people are always on the edge when it comes to giving tzedakah. They have to compel themselves. Many times they have to push themselves, especially when there's a certain demand and there's certain greater denominations which is demand from them. They have it. They still have to push themselves. So Alter Rebbe says sometimes the person has to shech, not only compel, persuade, bring that conviction to the Yetzer Hara. As we know it, sometimes we have to slaughter the Yetzer Hara because he's holding on so tight. Yes, with money. And therefore, the Alter Rebbe, we could appreciate this expression. Alter Rebbe, Chol HaZeveach HaSitzrei. But in this area of Tzedakah, and he opens his hand and opens his heart. He subdues the forces of evil and impurity. He transformed the dark to the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Like we said, Hashem who dwells in a level of asiyah, of action. In other words, he dwells within the lowly, precisely in ikvis Mashiach, which is in the spirit of what he said before. So there he says that Nafal Sukkos David and Adlev Chinas Arglaim and Ekvaim, it fell, it shattered, but in that falling and shattering, it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu's energy is coming to the level of asiyah. So there's a concept of a sheikhin aleinu. He dwells not only on higher planes, but all the way in asiyah, and namely in ikvis Mashiach, and the heels, and the footsteps, and the heels of Gola's heels, which is the lowest part of the human being, the human organ, the human structure, the human the organ and the human composure, posture. It's the lowest because the Shechina is Sheikhan Leino Nasiyah the Ikvis Mashiach. So when you sweat you sweat in giving stuck, if you will, or not to go away from the Alter Rebbe's lashon, you slaughter Yetzer Hara in this area. And again, we don't have to explain this because we know about that. Partying with money, sometimes you need slaughtering. But when you do that, you open your hand and your heart, you subdue the Sitra Achra, the negative force, you transform the darkness to the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is at that moment Hashem is dwelling upon us in Asi and Ikvis Mashiach, as we just explained before. And therefore, V'yiski leaders Ayin B'Ayin, you will be able to see eye to eye. B'Shuv Hashem Tzim, when Hashem comes back to Zion, which is the time of Geulah, which the tzedakah itself is going to usher in. And when you slaughter Yitzhar, means you give more tzedakah, so you're bringing quicker the Geulah. When the Geulah comes, and Shuv Hashem Tzim, and Hashem is going to return to Zion, to Yerushalayim, you'll be ayin, you'll be able to see eye to eye with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, more than somebody who didn't excel in that mitzvah tzedakah, might be doing a lot of important things, including learning Torah. But in this generation, when the Sukkos David came down and is involved, so to say, in Ikraglaim, in Ikvaim, in Asiyah, and even though he says a Sheikhin Aleinu, and you deal with the Avodah which is parallel to that, the Avodah of Asiyah of Tzedakah, and if you need to slaughter Yetzer Hara, you do that, so may it be. You will merit to see eye to eye when that Geulah is ushered in. B'Shuv Hashem Tzin Chulu, when Hashem will return to Zion, etc. Which is the conclusion of Perek Tes, of Igeres Tes, this ninth letter of the Alter Rebbe Igeres HaKodesh.